This week, we're going to learn about Amazon S3 and resource-based policies. Last week, we learned how to assume a role from one account to another account, and we moved from our management account to our security audit account and created a new S3 bucket that's going to hold all of our CloudTrail logs once we switch our CloudTrail to be an organization trail for everything in our organization instead of just the management account, which is how it's working right now. Those log files are stored in what's known as Amazon S3, and you've probably heard about S3 before because it's like, I don't know, one of the biggest causes of data breaches on the internet these days. Anyway, we'll get into that in a moment. S3 is known as Simple Storage Service and was one of the first AWS services ever created. It's known as object storage. Object storage is all about storing data as distinct units called objects. Each of those units includes the data, some metadata, and a unique identifier. It sounds a lot like a file system, and it is, but it's kind of like a file system for the internet because I don't have to worry about allocating the storage. I just load stuff up into S3. And what's even more interesting is S3 is designed to be really durable. So stuff I put into S3 should be there basically forever. I can't even remember how long Amazon guarantees that it's safe for. And it's highly scalable. You can put, petabytes of data. I mean, I don't want to pay that bill, but you can do it. And you get accessibility. If I put an object into S3, I can potentially access it from anywhere on the internet if I set up the right permissions. And this is where some of the problems come from, some of the complexities, and where bucket policies originate from. The thing about S3, or the thing about any object storage, because those other cloud providers have their own version of it, is that the things that we put into object storage are designed to be accessible across the internet, but we have to have a way to control access. And that's what resource policies are. So far, everything we've done, we worked with identity-based policies and we worked with organization policies, those service control policies. Identity-based policies are designed to determine what entitlements, what somebody is allowed to do within the account. A service control policy is designed to decide what API calls are even allowed to function, which services are we allowed to use from within an account. But now we're talking about controlling access from outside of our environment. And well, even though you could write an identity-based policy that will give you access to S3, that's great for determining what your own users can do with S3, but it's not going to do anything if somebody out there on the internet wants to access that object that we've stored within S3. That's what resource-based policies are for. It's because there are some resources in Amazon, and S3 is one of the biggest ones, that you want to be able to allow access from outside of your account and outside of your namespace, because you're giving people access. You don't want to create users in AWS for them, but you want to do that in a safe and controlled way. So just think of it as file permissions for the entire internet. And we're going to work with resource policies in lots of different places. And what makes them a little more complicated is it's not just like giving access based on based on IP addresses. Resource policies are used to also control access from things like other Amazon accounts. If you think about it, the API call, if I make it from my account to access an object in S3 in your account, the API call happens in my account. My identity-based policy will manage whether or not I can do that. Your side never sees that API call. It's just one of those weird nuances for how these things work. All right. So in S3, we store objects in these collections called buckets. And I like to think of a bucket kind of like a file share. And buckets support paths, just like directories in a file system. Now, one of the big things we have to watch out for is many large data leaks have occurred, both breaches and just leaks, things that get you into the headlines, because S3 can store massive amounts of data, like entire backups of customer data, and it can become public on the internet. By default, S3 is private, but there's a variety of ways that it can be made public. And sometimes developers take shortcuts. The vast majority of public S3 buckets, it's not because somebody hacked Amazon, it's because somebody made a mistake. Or if somebody gains access to the credentials of a developer, well, then, okay, they're going to use those and potentially make that bucket public. There's some nuances to how resource-based policies work that we do need to talk about, and so I'm going to go really quickly and diagram that out. Let's go and let's make an S3 bucket here, and let's call that our log bucket like we're going to use today. Now, as I mentioned before, buckets have attached to them a bucket policy. And that bucket policy, if there's no bucket policy, there's no access. So nobody from outside your account, nobody from another Amazon account can access that data. But in our case, we want to allow access from our management account to a bucket that's stored. This bucket we're talking about is going to be in our security audit account. So we're already going cross account, and we need to allow access to that bucket from outside of our environment, and that's that bucket policy that we're going to go ahead and write. Technically, I could actually write on that bucket policy, allow access from the IP address 1234. Weird, same as combination of my luggage. And if somebody on the internet has that 1234, they can access it. All right, so I mentioned there was some weird nuance, and what do I mean by that? So let me open up to a little more white space over here. And there's one thing about how resource-based policies work, and this is all for different resources. Oh, by the way, as you're going to see, it's JSON, very similar to IAM, the identity-based policies, and service control policies. But if you think about how the policies that we've worked on so far, so we have a circle of our identity-based policies there, and we have a circle of our, let's say, our service control policies. So I have my SCPs here, and my identity-based policies here. And what I'm allowed to do is only the intersection. So what that and that say that I'm allowed to do. And that's my total permissions. That's why in our service control policies, we kind of started with an allow all. Because if we didn't have that, it doesn't matter how many identity-based policies we could give, it wouldn't do anything. This, however, is different than the intersection of a resource-based policy and an identity-based policy. Now, the reason that it's kind of different this way is when I go to make an API call, so if I make an API call to do something, that gets evaluated by the service control policy if it's a yes, then it gets checked by the identity-based policy to see it's a yes, and there's a few other things, but eventually I can do it. If I circle here, and we'll just go with a resource policy, and so this is going to be our bucket policy on the bottom and my identity-based policy on the top. And if the total permissions, let me actually write it out a different way. So here's me. If I go to make an API call, that API call is in my account, it's evaluated by that identity-based policy, and if that says yes, I can go ahead and access that bucket that's all the way over there. Okay. However, if I'm making an access request off the internet, if that resource-based policy says yes, get things the same colors here, then I can also access it that way, even if the identity-based policy says no. I can allow access with either an identity policy or a resource policy. But if that resource policy allows access, I'm going to be able to have access. So it's an or operation. And I'm simplifying a little bit. That was supposed to be an R there. But that's meant to be more of an or than an and. So those are the key points. Amazon S3 Simple Storage Service is object storage. It allows us to keep files and metadata in things called objects that we put in collections called buckets. To control access, we use bucket policies, which are a form of a resource-based policy. And if the bucket policy allows access, even if I don't have an identity policy to allow access, or even if it denies me access, it doesn't matter. Because that resource is saying, you're allowed to talk to me. That identity-based policy isn't going to be a factor. We don't really need to get into total nuances of that, but that's an important difference between how the other policies work. So it's an or, this or that allows access, you get access. as opposed to our service control and identity policies, which is this and that have to have access to give you access. Now, because it's easy to mess some of this up, Amazon's got a great feature called Block Public Access. We're going to leave that on for now. We're going to learn how to use it later, but that just prevents any accidental making something public. Amazon didn't have that for a very long time, which is how a lot of those public exposures happen. This has definitely helped to reduce those, even though it doesn't eliminate them. All right, we're going to jump in. We're going to play with the JSON. We're going to learn how the policy language works and the pieces come into place. Only going to take us our usual, 10, 15 minutes to get through that. And some of this will probably make more sense. For this lab, we've got two big steps. The first is we're going to gather a bunch of pieces of information. There's actually 4 things that we're going to need. Then we will go ahead and edit those into a bucket policy. Don't worry, I've got a template for you to use. You'll just be copying and pasting into that template. And then we're going to save that bucket policy on our bucket. What this is going to do is it's going to allow CloudTrail from our management account to talk to and save its files in that S3 bucket, just like I diagrammed out before. To start, if you go to the blog post, and I've got a draft version here, it'll look pretty similar to this. Copy out those 4 pieces of information that I want you to go ahead and gather. The management account ID, trail ARN, bucket ARN, and put those onto a cheat sheet or a scrap sheet. I don't know. Can you call it a scrap sheet if it's not a piece of paper? Let's go ahead and start pulling these IDs and numbers down because we will need all of them to fill out our organization policy. First is management account ID. So from there, I'm going to go in and, helps me back in the AWS console. This is the easiest one. Just click in the upper right corner. There's your account ID right there. And click on that copy paste button. Puts that on the clipboard. Switch over, paste that in. Now, the management account is also where our CloudTrail lives, and we need the Amazon resource name of that CloudTrail. Back into the console, we'll go to CloudTrail, click it there, or type it into the search field, CloudTrail. Then, on the left-hand side, go to Trails and click on your default trail. And the ARN is right here up at the top. I'm just going to copy this. That is the full Amazon resource name that we need. Zoom back out, and I'll put that in my ARN. The next thing we need, it's actually the bottom item on my list, is our organization ID. I can get that by going into the console, click in the upper right corner again, and this time go to Organization. Really easy. It's right there on the left side. Copy that out, and then paste that onto my cheat sheet. The last thing I need is the bucket name, the bucket ARN. And that is in my security audit account. To get there, I have to go to the security audit account. Go up here to switch role. And if you forget, or if you did forget, you can go to switch role. And remember that ID is right here for the account ID. And if I do switch role, I can enter that account ID here. And then my role name, which is always organization account access role. And then that display name. As I mentioned, you really got to get used to typing organization account access role. Mine's already on my list, so I'll just cancel there. Click here and select my security audit account. Starting to get errors because the security audit account does not have rights to see everything about the rest of the organization. That's okay because we will be going to S3. This is where we created our bucket last week. And as a reminder, it should look like this. This account ID is the name of your management account ID. That's the one that's saving the logs in. You could have named this anything, but these are the names that we stuck with. And then random value at the end, which will be different than the random value in your management account. Now, this is the tricky one. Watch what I do here. If I click on security audit and I go switch back, I'm now back in my management account. There's no color coding and it gives me that account ID. You'll see I have that CloudTrail there as well. This is where the logs are currently saving. We don't want to be in this account. You may or may not have, I have this CloudFormation template thing from something we did earlier. You probably just have that right there, but I want you to go ahead and make triple check and make sure you are in your security audit account. Then click on your bucket, and it'll be the only one for now, and go to Properties, and you have that ARN, Amazon resource name for that bucket. Go ahead, click on that. One thing you'll get used to is sometimes you're going to use the URLs. Other times you're going to use the Amazon resource names, depending on where you're accessing a bucket from. When we're doing it all internally to AWS, it's always going to be that because in this case, we don't have a way to get to it through a URL. It's only internal to Amazon. And let me put that onto my cheat sheet. Okay, these are all the values that I need. Next thing I need to do is go back to the lab, and you'll see this big field to copy out the template for the policy. So I'm going to copy that. And I want to create a new file here, paste. So let me make sure there's no extra characters. And oops, you see there is a little bit up top. Got to delete those out because that would actually break the lab, since that would affect the formatting of the JSON. What we will do now, I'm going to go through this slowly, and I'm going to show you where to copy and paste. And I'm keeping the window kind of small, deliberately just to keep your focus. What this first statement says is, allow the CloudTrail service to get the permissions of the bucket, that's what that get bucket ACL is, on, whoops, what's that? Bucket ARN? We need to pull that off of our other cheat sheet. So it was still the one on my clipboard, but I'll copy it out again. You notice that I took out those brackets, those at the arrows thingies at the beginning and the end. Make sure that that's what this looks like. You don't have any of those extra characters. So this says now CloudTrail is allowed to get the bucket ACL for our new CloudTrail bucket. That's an S3. But I have a condition here. This condition is not super critical, but kind of critical. If you think about it, the CloudTrail service could perform that API call on this bucket, but it doesn't lock it down to only our CloudTrail that's accessing that bucket. And that's what this condition does. This says only allow this access if it is from the resource name of the CloudTrail in our management account. So let me pull that. So this is our management account's CloudTrail. I named mine default. Click here, paste that in. And I'm going to review this again. CloudTrail is allowed to get the bucket access control list for the S3 bucket where we're about to put our logs, but only if it originates from our CloudTrail. This is to solve something known as the confused deputy attack, which is something I don't want to go into too many details about. But technically, if we didn't have this statement in here and somebody knew our account ID and, well, if they knew a bunch of other things, they could actually trick our CloudTrail or trick the CloudTrail service into storing their logs in our buckets. We don't want that. So this makes sure that we can't do that. All right. So that's to see what the permissions are. CloudTrail needs that to check on things. And now it's, let's allow the CloudTrail service, put object. That's how we actually save our objects in. And it's a little fancier this time. We're going to put in our bucket ARN. So let me go ahead and do that. Bucket ARN, copy that, paste it in. So it's going to allow me to save objects in the bucket, but in the path of AWS logs and whatever that management account ID is. This is there. This is a safety valve, and that's the management account ID. Copy that. This is a safety valve that Amazon puts in place that if something in the organization ever broke, like you removed this account from the organization, the management account could still save its logs here. So that's what this allows it to do. It gives it full control. And now we have to, again, put the limits on it that it is only from our cloud trail. Copy that. Trail ARN, paste in, trail ARN. It's got trail in the name, so I know I'm pasting the correct thing. All right. The last statement is the beef. This is what allows the organization to save logs from throughout the rest of the organization into our cloud trail. All right. So to do this, I need that bucket ARN again. Whoops. I wanted to be here and go back here. Okay. So I need that bucket ARN again. Copy that. Then I'm going to go ahead and paste it there where those braces are. And you know what? By the time you guys see this, I'll have it fixed. I should have had a brace here and here. Now I'm going to put in my organization ID. What this is going to say is allow put object into the CloudTrail bucket logs and then a path that has my current organization ID. Go ahead, copy that out, paste that organization ID in, and that should work. And I've got all my right file path. And then one last time, I only want to allow that trail ARN to do this work. So I'm going to go copy that, go back, paste it back in. Now I'm going to just double check some things. So I want to make sure quote there. That's an ARN. My JSON all looks good. And I'm just scrolling up. I'm eyeballing this to make sure, like here, the source ARN is the trail, good. The resource is the logs, and that full file path looks correct. And then, again, making sure that the resource, it's the current bucket that we're in, and the source ARN, that looks correct. And that should be everything. All right, so I'm going to copy all of this out. And then we go into this security audit account. And I'm going to click on this permissions tab. And again, I'm still here for the bucket. Click on permissions. Bucket policy, click on edit. And I'm going to paste that whole policy in. That looks good to me. Let me hit save. See if I get any errors. Now, it's just checking the syntax. It's not checking that it's the right bucket policy. I won't know that until I go back to my other account and we actually change the trail. Next week, we're going to talk more about how CloudTrail works and some of the rules around it. And then we're going to go ahead and make that switch. That's it. Have a great week.